All right. Welcome everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic day so far. My name is Marcelo Bonato, and I'm one of the founders of Recoded. We are a nonprofit with a mission to prepare talented youth in conflict-affected areas to enter the digital economy as software developers, designers, and tech leaders. Today, we're doing the third session of our 4 events on bridging the digital inequality gap in the Middle East. As we know, COVID-19 is reshaping many long-held assumptions about the way we live, work, and interact with the world around us. In these sessions, we learn how a global business leader like Bloomberg is adapting to this new reality. What do these changes mean for young people across the Middle East, and what opportunities exist for organizations to minimize the digital inequality gap? Today's session will be focused on diversity in technology, and will last for about an hour and a half with 4 panelists. I have a few words to say about that in a minute, but first I want to go through a quick round of ground rules so that we ensure a good discussion today. So first, please use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen to leave comments or ask questions. You can do that now or at any time during the session. Our team will gather your questions and direct them to me. We won't be able to go through all the questions, so please respect that it is at my discretion in the end as the moderator. Your microphones will remain mute during the session, so please do not unmute yourself, but feel free to put your camera on if you wish. Please also note that this session is being recorded and will be made public on YouTube and on Recoded website and social media channels. Finally, we're able to do this speaker session because of a partnership between Recoded and Bloomberg with a goal of upskilling youth in the Middle East to access high-value employment opportunities in the digital economy and ultimately work towards a more inclusive world. The partnership includes mentorship to our students as well as events such as this one. Now to our discussion. I want to introduce today's discussion by saying that it will be very candid and open, and I expect a little bit emotional and difficult at times. When we decided to talk about diversity, we agreed to dive into the topic head first, steering away from the traditional politically correct or whitewashed discourse on this topic. So it will not be an easy conversation, but it's a very necessary one. And I will start with myself and say that it is frankly a little bit unsettling that I am your moderator today. I am a privileged white male who did not have to struggle because of gender, skin color, nationality, religious belief, or sexual orientation. So I'm very humbled by the opportunity to moderate the panel today, and I'll do my best to do justice to the discussion. We have an incredible and diverse panel, and let me say this. They do not need a white male like me to legitimize what they will say today. You will hear their voices, their stories, and their ideas on how we can go from here and have more, diverse workplaces. I'm also here to learn, as I hope you are too. And I have always considered myself non-racist and respectful towards others, no matter who they are and where they come from. But is it really enough? What am I doing to understand the root causes of discrimination? Do I have unconscious biases and how do they shape my decisions and the decisions I make in my life and in my work? The work that we do at Recoded is founded on the belief that diversity is beautiful, and we try to stay true to that value as much as possible. But there is much work to be done so that we can have a truly diverse organization, which is why I'm very pleased to have Bloomberg as a partner in this conversation, a partner that is willing to be transparent and share what we can do together to have more diversity in technology. The numbers are there to back diversity up. businesses that strive to hire employees with diverse ethnic backgrounds are 33% more likely to outperform. And research also shows that a 60% increase in creativity within diverse companies. Yet we still don't see much diversity in leadership positions, and female participation is still low in many countries, especially in the Middle East. Systematic and institutionalized discrimination is real. Let's recognize that for a moment. So how might we push the conversation forward and bring diversity into play as a strength in the technology sector? Joining the discussion today are four exceptional panelists. I'll start with Ivana Hu, who is the CEO of Omelas, an artificial intelligence company that maps and analyzes digital influence operations. Ivana is a champion of inclusivity in the global economy and a member of several boards, including Recoded, something that we're very proud of. Francesco Scalari is an engineering manager at Bloomberg, where he helps teams to become inclusive and welcoming for the diverse talent. He is an engineering diversity and inclusion champion and a mental health first aider. Pooja Malpani is the head of engineering for Bloomberg Media. She leads the engineering team responsible for consumer media, marketing, and data visualization. Pooja is also an ambassador for women in technology and is actively involved in engineering initiatives related to diversity. And finally, Manisha Mehrotra is the head of diversity and inclusion for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at Bloomberg, where she brings innovation and tenacity to designing and delivering wide-ranging strategic diversity and inclusion solutions that drive organizational change. Thank you so much for joining the session today. And I want to start with you, Manisha, with a question about the great work that you're doing at Bloomberg. So one's approach to diversity can look very different from country to country. Bloomberg being a global organization, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do and how you ensure a universal approach to diversity, one that can work cross-culturally? And welcome.
Absolutely, thank you. And thank you so much for having me as well. I'll start with just sharing a little bit. And if I talk too long, Marcelo, please feel free to cut me off. I feel very passionately, like I imagine many people on this Zoom call feel as well. So across EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, we have employees in 44 countries. Now, in some of those countries, we might have 3 employees, and others we might have 150. So the definition of diversity and inclusion means something very different in each of those countries. In some cases, it's very open. In some cases, it's not as much, or it might be newer in the journey of D&I. And even our own understanding of identity, for example, plays into the work, into our mindset. So having organizations talk about diversity and inclusion, if society hasn't thought about it, can feel very inauthentic almost. So it's very much about how do you create an environment of inclusion where difference is truly respected and leveraged, right? Like that's the point that we want to get to, is that it's leveraged. But what that does mean also is breaking all the misconceptions that exist. That when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's never about lowering hiring standards. It's never about giving somebody a free pass. It's actually about us connecting with the widest pool that exists. Just because they don't think like me or talk differently than me or execute differently than me doesn't mean it's bad, it's just different. So in many times it's checking our own conscious and unconscious. We talked a lot about overt and covert at our prep call, biases that organizations have, because organizations are also filled with people just like us who live in society, who are exposed to media and who are exposed to biases and environments. So it's like, how do you create this almost, utopia is too strong of a word, but how do you create an environment where all people can feel respected, valued? So the way that we do it is we have a very big focus on diversity and inclusion. We talk a lot about inclusion, but that doesn't mean that we forget about diversity, because in our view, it's important that people feel comfortable to leverage their diversity. because you and I might look exactly the same and talk exactly the same, but have very different experiences in our life experiences, because not all diversity is visible. And I think it is teaching our leaders, our managers, our hiring managers, to think about diversity outside of sometimes race and gender or cultural nuances, making sure that they understand that race, gender, ethnicity are very, very, very important, but also helping them understand, because it's not always visible, you have to be in the questioning perspective. You have to create an environment that allows for people to feel comfortable to share their background, to then be able to share their ideas, or when they disagree with you. So I think, in a very long way of sharing it, the way that we do it is we definitely try to be locally nuanced. We focus on both the differences that people bring and people feeling proud about that, and creating an environment that everybody can hopefully thrive.
And Manisha, I imagine that with COVID-19 and a lot of work now being done remotely, you as head of inclusion for different regions, what has come to your mind and how your team has prepared themselves to deal with any potential problems with diversity and inclusion that may have arisen from the fact that people are working remotely now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like we don't have enough time for me to answer that question fully. So I will just very high level talk through it. There've been a lot of challenges with COVID. In many cases, when people come from diverse backgrounds, in general, they might feel invisible in organizations like mine, which is a shame. And that's what we're always trying to break. Now, imagine you go from being able to see colleagues to now you're all virtual. So there's more of a feeling of isolation, of getting left off projects, and things like that. So we've put in place a lot of different ways for our leaders to have different checklists and different points to make sure that they're leveraging their whole teams. But what has also come into play is some people feeling very isolated. So we have some of our population out of our Dubai office, for example, is very young, and they're in sales, and they're always used to traveling, and now they're in smaller flats, right? This is a couple months ago before they were back at work. And now they feel they're far away from family. They don't have the workplace. They're not traveling. They're stuck in smaller flats. And there's just a real sense of, is this going to be okay? So mental health has become a very, very big focus as part of COVID. The disproportionate impact on Black and Brown communities has been a really large focus, and making sure that our managers understand that employees are going through this, that they might have either lost someone or they might have a family member stuck in another part of the world. So if they can't deliver on that Excel spreadsheet in the moment or code at that exact moment, we saw with the George Floyd murder in the US and the overflow across this part of the world as well, really has created a lot of space almost for conversations to happen, where people talk about allyship across dimensions, but within the COVID framework, because we don't know when we're going back. We don't know who's comfortable in going back. But right now we're all living through this together, and it is genuinely very hard times for employees. So from a D&I lens, it is making sure that we are connecting with every single one of our employees on a consistent manner while pushing forward, because our work has not slowed down at all. We haven't taken time off from initiatives on D&I. Our leaders just presented to the management committee as to what they've been doing in D&I. So that all has definitely continued.
Thank you for mentioning that, because we have also observed in our own work and in partners how that transition to work from home can be really difficult, especially for junior team members, as you said, and adapting to this new reality, especially when they take so much from the energy of being in the office, in addition to having the issues that you mentioned with infrastructure. I want to turn to Pooja now, as a female engineer and a leading voice for women in technology. In 2017, 2018, women of color earned a small percentage, about 14% of bachelor's degrees across all STEM fields, and less than a third of female students choose to study higher education courses in subjects like math and engineering. Can you tell us a little bit about your own professional journey and what advice you would give to young women who want to pursue a degree and career in STEM?
Sure. I'll start with acknowledging that this is a real problem, what you just said, Marcelo, about the gender ratio in tech. It it continues to be unbalanced, and it needs to continue to improve. The ratio is worse in leadership positions and for people of color. So, folks feeling uncertain to enter STEM is understandable. When you don't see role models, it can seem like a hard field to enter. However, having made the journey myself and having helped few others make the journey over the years, I will urge those on the fence to consider it strongly. STEM is exciting, challenging, and rewarding. While there aren't as many women of color in STEM as we'd like, the representation is improving, and you can be a part of the solution. When I entered the field, I started with doing my Bachelor of Engineering or rather my bachelor's in computer science, and was one of 16 women in a class of 60. And the ratio was worse when I decided to do my master's, where we had even fewer women. And over the course of my career, there were several meetings where I was the only female software engineer. I've been pleased to see that the trend has changed, and I see more women, especially more women in junior roles now. And that's promising, because these are women who are then going to become managers and VPs and eventually CEOs. And so it's an exciting change to see. Having said that, we have a long runway ahead of us. As I tell some young women I mentor, the hardest part is deciding to enter. Just like when you decide to run a marathon, in my opinion, the hardest part is signing up for it. Once you do sign up, more often than not, you will find the right training circles, support system, train hard and succeed. But that initial inertia needs to be overcome. It's the same with STEM. In the global landscape, you will find role models, mentors, and eventually sponsors. And over time, become a role model yourself for others who could be unsure, as perhaps some folks might be feeling right now. It can be a virtuous cycle.
And we're going to be talking a little bit about overt and covert discrimination in the workplace and recruitment processes. And from our experience with our students, it's really hard sometimes for them to understand if they're not being chosen for a job because they're not capable, or because covertly there is another reason why they're not being hired. In your experience, Pooja, how have you dealt with that in understanding what is actually behind a decision, if it's a question of you being capable for the job, or if there's more to it?
My general advice is to go ahead and interview, right? Interview a lot. There are going to be lots of rejections. That's a given, but every rejection is an experience. And one thing that I have done myself, and I suggest other people try as well, and some folks have had luck with this, is every time the recruiter turns back and says this is not a good fit, or for whatever reason you haven't been chosen to advance in the interview process, write back to them a very polite response. The worst is you don't get a reply, but write back to them about how you enjoyed the conversation and you thought the questions were interesting, and you would love to know where the gaps were, because it will help you prepare and perhaps come back a year later to the same company because you had a good time chatting with them. And most people want to help, right? When there are open positions, as a hiring manager, I myself I can't wait to fill that position so that we can have that person come in, ramp up and start doing the job. And so sending an email like that shows that you're interested, you're mature, you're accepting that, yes, maybe I'm not ready for this role. And hopefully the other end, folks will respond with, maybe, your fundamentals didn't come through, or you need to go back and learn algorithmic complexity. And bias is real. It's possible that the rejection is coming in the form of some kind of bias. But I like to think about it a little more positively. What's the best you can do with that outcome, and take that forward in your next set of interviews. And I'll go back to, you have to interview a lot. The best people also interview several times, right, to land that great offer. And so failure is a step towards eventually, landing your first or subsequent, great gigs. So don't get disheartened. Just know that the best people also have been rejected several times.
Thank you. And I also want to hear Ivana's opinion on that, because As a female tech entrepreneur, you are working in a pretty much male-dominated sector, and you also work across different countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. What are some of the challenges that you have faced as a woman, and do you have reasons to believe that we're making any progress when it comes to diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, so I definitely think that there has been progress, especially in the past 10 years, as people start to realize that even when you're talking about diversity and inclusion, it's not just because it's the politically correct thing to do, but it's actually because it generally adds something valuable to the project that you're working on, or your return on investment. And so I definitely think that there's a lot of great initiatives out there. Um, I would still say that the hardest part, and we've seen this, especially in my work in the Middle East, is that a lot of times people who, the, a, a lot of times the people that we're trying to hire who are engineers and developers, they have really good hard skills, but they're not very good at talking about themselves. And so that professional or that soft skill that's really lacking. To the point that we actually, in my previous company that was based out of Jordan, we actually had to give people basically like a 30-minute training right before they actually went and interview, just to make sure that everybody was on the same page of saying like, hey, just because you did this awesome thing, like you have to still be able to package yourself. And I think that is a skill set that's not emphasized enough in the Middle East, because the education system is just so focused on rote memorization, and not on soft skills.
In your experience, how have you, similar to what I asked Pooja, I'm just curious to hear, how have you navigated this, difficult environment where you're always second guessed, not because of your capacity, your ability, but because of your gender or the color of your skin, which is something that, I've seen happening both very openly and also in a very subtle way. And I think there's not one is worse than the other. They're equally bad, but I'm also curious to hear how these things can play out in such a subtle way that you kind of like, how do I react to that? Do I say something? What tools do I have to deal with this, discrimination and prejudice?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, a very fine line to walk, because for what I was told growing up is that I had to be twice as good as everybody else around me, whether that's with other white people or boys, because there is some kind of an inherent bias, I think, when people want to hire people that look like them because they can relate to them, and because there's that pattern of success. And of course that's a very flawed logic, but it's logic that a lot of people go by, whether subconsciously, or even unconsciously sometimes. And so in order to break that, my parents just told me, like, I have to work twice as hard as the next person, and I have to be twice as good. And so, and I generally think that that's what I have done so far. But there's that line where you're like, okay, like clearly I didn't get this interview because he went to the same school as the recruiter, and they're really good friends, and I'm never going to break into that white boys club. Or we in Jordan especially, we had a really hard time convincing, for example, my Jordanian colleagues, be like, hey, we need to give this Syrian refugee or this Palestinian a chance to work here because they're just as good. And the response is, well, we have to spend more time and effort on paperwork, because hiring refugees, it just takes a lot more paperwork than if we're to hire a Jordanian national. And being able to say, well, yes, that might be true, but they're bringing a completely different perspective because of their background, and I want that kind of thinking on my team. And so it took me a while to figure out how to make the right kind of argument. But at the end of the day, if you always try to think, okay, how can I rephrase what I want essentially, but in a self-interested way for the other person that I'm trying to convince. That has worked out actually pretty well for me in the past. And that's something that, will keep going. And then, sort of separate from all of that is the fact that sometimes you didn't get something because of who you are. And it's really hard not to take offense at it, but it's also very hard to recognize. Because especially for me, I work super hard, right? And so when I don't get something, my automatic default is, oh, I didn't work enough, or I didn't do this well enough. And I beat myself up because I'm a perfectionist. And it's hard to start to recognize no, actually, I think I did all I could. And it's just, this person is a problem.
Thanks for sharing that, Ivana. And I'm also curious from the manager side, right, Francesco? We were talking the other day about some of the work you do, and you said something about your role as a manager to ensure that teams are welcoming to diverse talent. So what does that look like in practice for you and your teams, and what steps do you take to make diverse teams thrive at Bloomberg?
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to this. I'm very, very excited to be here and to learn about from all of you, from all the questions you're going to ask, and from all of the answers that the other great panelists are giving. So yeah, I also wanted to say, relating to what you were saying at the beginning, Marcelo, about I'm also a white male person. I'm also full of privilege, and I've definitely benefited from this privilege in the past. And I do sometimes feel like, am I entitled to be here and talk about these topics? So I just wanted to relate to what you were saying earlier. These are definitely topics that I'm very, very passionate about. And to your questions, I think I really grew this interest as I became first a team leader and later a leader of leaders in Bloomberg. This really interest and passion towards helping teams, starting from my own team, I have to say, becoming more attractive to underrepresented groups, to people who would bring different perspectives, and people who were different from the people who were already part of the team. And it has really become something that I can't distinguish anymore from my core job. It is my core job now. Yeah, I can't think of any other way of being a manager at the moment. In practice, I think we were talking, for example, about hiring earlier. I think one thing is being very intentional about the kinds of team or the kinds of group I want to have in the future, and continue to move the needle towards that. So do everything we can to understand, as a hiring manager, my own bias, and try to mitigate the impact that bias has when I recruit, when I meet people who are interested in joining my group or my team. Doing all kinds of things to make sure that whenever I'm offering a position to someone or maybe rejecting someone, that I'm able to tell practical, effective, tangible reasons, and that there isn't any bias going on. It's also about, I tend to ask a lot of people, tell me if what I say sounds reasonable, sound credible. Can you hear anything that might sound like I'm biased because I'm using my own lens to judge a candidate, for example. And then, I mean, of course, hiring is not the end. I think it's very important, but I think we also have to create the environment for people to want to stay in our groups and our teams. I think, and here's really, there's a lot. I think in terms of pretty much every dynamic that we have in the team, I think it's really looking at from the perspective of, are we creating the conditions for everybody to be able to voice their opinion, voice their ideas, as Manisha said earlier, disagree with me when they don't agree, and make sure that they feel comfortable saying that, they feel psychologically safe to say that. For me, it's really about repeating this concept over and over with people, with my team, and then whenever I see something that happens that might be an indication of that we're not really being thorough in making sure that everybody feels welcome, is calling it out. Also calling myself out sometimes. When, for example, I send a meeting and I forget to put an agenda together with the meeting that explains what the meeting is going to be about. Things like that, for example. Or also making sure that we set expectations in meeting about, okay, we like to make a decision at the end of this meeting about this topic, about this alternative, and sending information in advance, so people who feel more comfortable thinking about offline can do that and can prepare for the meeting. Not everybody is. I'm the first one who doesn't excel at making decisions on the spot.
Absolutely. And one thing that you said before about, recruitment, and I'm very interested in recruitment and how we can unlock the biases that we may know that we have and we don't. I think this is a perfect segue to a next question that I have, because, we know that having more or less workplace diversity can be a recruitment issue. And discrimination in recruitment can be very explicit, like what some of our students have experienced when an employer rejects them, based on their nationality or refugee status. But discrimination can also be subtle, as we've been talking about. So I just want to go back to Manisha, because I want to hear from her in her role. What can we do to avoid both overt and covert discrimination in recruitment processes? I do believe, like, sometimes we are putting so much effort in a recruitment process, and I'm constantly asking myself, do we have a bias towards people who look like us or with the same education? So how do we mitigate that, Manisha?
Yeah, and Marcella, I apologize. There's some noise happening outside, so I might go on and off mute just for a few seconds. So a couple of ways that companies do it, and I think it's really important for candidates to keep an eye on this in their own experience as well, is making sure that the interview process has a diverse group of interviewers. And what that helps with is some of the biases that we've talked about, right? What it also helps with is some of the fewer known or the lesser known biases. So I always talk about accent hierarchy, for example. In many cases, some of the accents from the West, be it the UK, Australia, sometimes come across as better than accents from other parts of the world. And it's actually just really frustrating to me, because we all have accents, right? If we have the ability to speak, we all have accents. And what you'll hear sometimes in interviews is like, Marcelo, I'll pick on you because you're in the center of my screen. I don't really know if Marcelo can handle, I don't know about his communication skills. And it was just because the person wasn't used to hearing your accent. So I think it's very important for then, say Francesco and I were having that interview, for Francesco to call it out and be like, it's not an accent I hear often, but what he said was really good. So there's subtle ways to call it out. And that's what companies can do. I think for candidates, and many times it really is, sorry, something going by. For candidates, it's also letting them know that, and being clear, right? Like for right now, it's about getting this first job, and the focus is on the first job. But what in yourself are you willing to put up with and also not put up with? And that's a very, very difficult conversation and discussion to have with yourself, with loved ones, as to what you're willing to take from the organization. In the recruitment process, and many times when you read job adverts or postings online, I say that they're always written because it's like the perfect unicorn, right? If I could make this perfect person, these are all the skills that this person will have. Very rarely do you ever get 100% match on job profiles. It just doesn't exist, right? Like this is something that we as humans make up based on coding skills, experience, and they have to be a good communicator, and they have to be strategic. And it's like the and list that doesn't exist. So we opt out many times, and especially people from diverse communities feel like they're not good enough, or there's no way they have all of these requirements. So I think that's where our own unconscious bias seeps in. And I know I've definitely been guilty of it as well. So it's not that I'm at all an expert on this. And to I think Pooja's point earlier, is just apply. It's okay to get rejected. We all get rejected. But the idea is like stop selecting out of companies that you think may or may not be a good fit unless there's evidence and proof. So that's the bias that I would say is on the individual's perspective. And on the company's perspective, there is a responsibility to make sure the person has a fair opportunity, is interviewing with a different set of people who are aware of biases and understand of how to call out their peers when it comes to the recruitment process.
Thank you. And you mentioned imposter syndrome, which is something that I think we all have to deal with, right? And in looking at that job description and thinking, oh, I will never qualify for any of these jobs. And we've had, several of our students coming to us and say, I won't be able to find a job because here it is. They're asking so much experience that I don't have. And it feels sometimes that, as you say, the job description is written for someone who doesn't exist or is so disconnected to the reality of that person. So I wanted to go back to you, Francesco, because when we're talking about this imposter syndrome, and I think Manisha has mentioned the allyship in her initial remarks, how you believe it can help individuals from all walks of life to succeed, to have that perception of how we're phrasing the job description, or more importantly, once you hire someone, how do you make them feel that I'm not supposed to be here? I just got this new job with Bloomberg, but I don't feel like this is align with the expectations that the company might have of me. Like, you as a manager, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think we're talking about, as you've mentioned earlier, like recognizing that not everybody has the same today in tech. Being mostly white male, not everybody has the same opportunity, same access to opportunities. There is privilege, and I think this is all tied also with the fact that all of us, but I think especially people from underrepresented group, experience probably multiple times in their career, in their lives, imposter syndrome, where they feel like they're not qualified for applying for a position, but also when after, as you said, after they even get the position, even after they get hired, they don't feel like they belong, that they're qualified. At any point, they feel like they can be discovered like they're fraud because they're not qualified to be there. I think it is something very relevant, very significant. I think even myself, as recently as last week, I talked to a colleague from Egypt who was telling me about his own journey into after a couple of years in his team, feeling less of a fraud, feeling less imposter syndrome, and how he, at the beginning, he felt like he was surrounded by people from the best UK and European universities, and he didn't feel like he was like them. So I think I like to think that allyship helps with this, in the sense that when I think, for example, about even my own journey, I think I recognize that I was helped. I did receive help in getting to where I am. I had allies. I had someone, a colleague of mine, who, for example, told me that one day I was going to become team leader, that he thought I was going to become a team leader. And at the time, I didn't see myself as a team leader. I felt I was pretty different from the rest of the team leaders I saw at the time. I didn't feel like I was as assertive or as bold, as able to make decisions on the spot. So I consider that person a big ally of mine, because it made me start thinking about that. And I started wondering, oh, why did this person say that he thinks I could be a good team leader? And that was the start of a journey. So I think, yes.
And allyship, for those who are wondering, is exactly what you're describing, right, Francesco? Is having those champions inside of your company who are, making sure that they're telling you, the journey might be tough, but believe in yourself, because it's going to be a learning curve for you and for everyone else. But it's not about your who you are or the language you speak or how you look like, but these are all things that you bring to the team that adds value to the team, as and the company for that matter. So I just wanted to change gears a little bit, because one thing that we hear a lot about diversity is the impact of diversity, or the lack of, in the products and services that we developed in technology, right? After all, we're talking about diversity in technology, and we've discussed so far how that has an impact on the individual level when it comes to discrimination. But the lack of diversity can also have a tremendous impact in the products that are developed in technology companies. So Pooja, I wanted to ask you, at Bloomberg, you build products and services that help clients, customers to make smarter, faster decisions. What does diversity add to your creation process, and how does it create more value for your customers? Why is it so important?
Sure. I'm thinking that I'll answer this with an example. In let's see. Well, I didn't introduce myself, but one of the things that I do is oversee consumer media. And so my team is responsible for Bloomberg.com, which is the landing page, and people come to the website with different expectations. Some folks come there just to see the news. Some folks come to learn about Bloomberg, the mayor, the presidential candidate. Some folks learn about Bloomberg, the terminal. And being the global platform that we are, we cover news from all over the world, and in turn, users from all over the world consume our content. Building software for global audiences benefits tremendously from diversity of opinions, as it is a better reflection of end users. That seems pretty, it's very logical. It seems like we know that, so we should all be investing in diversity. And yet your question about, what happens in the lack of diversity, what happens is you build products that provide value to a set of users, but not a diverse set of users, right? An example is how users choose to pay for news varies by geography. Another example, different users are interested in different content, right? And personalization is key in serving up relevant bits of information to different user segments. There's something called Quick Take by Bloomberg, which is media in short form videos, which delivers up to the minute analysis on the biggest news trends and ideas for new generation of leaders, instead of long form text-based stories, which is what you typically see on news websites. Quick Take was designed for users on the go who are more likely to consume digestible chunks of content in the form of short video clips. These users tend to be younger audiences. So I would imagine that if we had a team of only, let's say, older team members, it's less likely that we would have come up with a product like that. Diversity of thought is a crucial component in all of these examples that I shared. In consumer media, we have an innovation lab called Beehive, which was started as a place where we could do data-centric, user research-based rapid prototyping. And when I say rapid prototyping, we're talking about 5 days, right? Where day 1 is research, day 2 is exploring a variety of possible solutions, day 3, the team converges on a single solution to explore, day 4, they build a prototype, and day 5, they put it in front of users for validation. We had some dedicated staff for this, and a year and a half ago, we decided to democratize innovation in the media world inside Bloomberg, and we decided to try a rotation model where different developers would join Beehive for a quarter, work on a prompt that we provided, a topic that we provided, and then roll off once the quarter ended. This is helpful for the developers, surely, because they get to try something different, dabble with potentially new tech, focus on the research aspect and idea generation, things that they might not be doing on their regular team. But it's also tremendously helpful for the business. The diversity of perspectives has led to some amazing product launches. This includes a career calculator that we launched as an experiment last year called WorkWise in the US, where users could answer a 3-part quiz, and at the end, using our data-backed insights, get some personalized information about, here's a degree that I could pursue to be ready for this particular job profile that I'm interested in, or here's a city that I could move to get 20% raise in compensation, things like that. And so and there are other examples like automatic news summarization using AI, and all of this to say that even if I gave the same prompt each quarter and had different people coming in, the solutions would look very different, just because of different different people, different perspective, fresh ideas, and all of that. So in my experience, if I have to summarize this, at Bloomberg Media, I've seen some of the best ideas come from brainstorming sessions across disciplines. When ad sales, marketing, engineering, product, and editorial teams come together, they're able to bring different dimensions. And often the ideas at the end are more well-rounded. Zooming in within each team, having diversity of thought helps avoid echo chambers. At the end of the day, we want to provide value to the users, Marcelo, as you said, and there are different ways of doing that. So having homogeneous teams will often result in fewer iterations and innovation. Diverse teams, on the other hand, can sometimes be more challenging and even appear chaotic, but also often result in some delightful user experiences and value add.
Thanks for that. And I'm just going to pause here for a minute to say that I do have a couple of more questions for our panelists, but I want to see some of your questions, the audience, coming through. So do not miss the opportunity to ask anything you want for our panelists. If you want to address your question to someone specifically, please say so. Just write in the chat. We're going to be waiting for your questions. Otherwise, I can be interviewing them, for the whole hour and a half here. And that would be fun for me, but you should also ask your own questions. So let me go back here, because I want to talk to Ivana about being an entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur is one of the most difficult things that I've done in my life. And I can only imagine how much harder it is when the odds are against you, right? So Ivana, what's your advice to young people who wish to create their own ventures and do not know how to use their background, whether it is their gender, nationality, religion, what have you, to build a successful company? And I know that there are a lot of people in this call who want to be entrepreneurs or are entrepreneurs already, but they might not know how to leverage this, beautiful life story that they have because of who they are into their companies.
Yeah, I would say and this goes back to a point that was discussed earlier about how men tend to be a little bit probably overconfident in their skills and in themselves, and that we women tend to especially be a little bit more shy about our abilities, and we just, pardon the language, we just don't bullshit as much. But that's really not how the world is made. So I would actually say, as an entrepreneur, like, you have to own your own identity. and you can still go to the best schools. You can go, you can have a rags to rich story, go to Harvard, and then go to Harvard Business School, and then go to McKinsey and do all these right things. But at the end of the day, like, if you are not there will be people who will obviously accept you, and I think that's the majority of people, but there will always be people who will look at your background and your skin color and your gender and never really accept you, and you have to be okay with that, right? So that's where the self-confidence really comes in. I mean, like, you have to be okay with sort of being an outsider and think about, how can I actually use this as advantage? Is it because then I can think outside the box and be able to suggest a solution that no one else had thought of before? Or do I try to blend in? And I mean, like, I think there's some people who can blend in. But, for me, at least, that wasn't really an option. So I sort of took the opposite route. I was like, okay, I know for a fact that I'm not going to blend in superficially. So I'm just going to own it. I'm going to have this haircut, even though I'm, briefing super high level CEOs and people at the White House. But you know what, but because of who I am, I can see things from different lenses and approaches, and as long as I can be as effective, if not more effective, as everyone else, like, so be it. But it took me a long time to get to that point where I was that self-confident, and a part of it was because when I moved to the US, I moved to a town that was 97% white. And the only Black person we had was half white, half Black, right? And everybody knew each other. And I just grew up in that environment. And it wasn't really until I went to university where someone told me on my first day, and she said, "Oh, you're really whitewashed." And I was like, I don't even know what that means. But that really took a lot of self-esteem out of me, because I started to question, do I talk like a white person? Do I do this like a white person? And I started just second guessing myself, and that was not healthy. And it wasn't until 10 years later that I started to realize, no, like, I am who I am. There's certain things I can't change, and I'm going to channel it into the right way. And as an entrepreneur, when you're constantly told no, I actually think that is one of the best part about being a minority, is that you're so used to having that rejection that you actually build a much bigger resilience than if you were someone who basically got stuff handed to you, right? Because that there's no other way except to push forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I have a sort of a final question. If you don't have other questions, I'll keep moving on. But one question that I wanted to ask all four panelists. So one thing that I would like to get out of this conversation is really some practical steps that we can take to prioritize lifting up diverse candidates into leadership roles. This is one thing. This is one thing that we as an organization at Recoded, we're trying to also come up with a way that our staff have opportunities to grow into leadership roles. So how can we make sure that we have diversity in leadership as well? And how can we advocate for diversity in countries where this conversation is still maturing? That, we work in the Middle East, and we have, the panelists here working in Africa and Asia, and how do we advocate for that conversation? So feel free to answer the first question or both questions, second question, but I wanted to start with you, Manish, and hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. So just as everybody was talking, I was just taking a few notes as well. So Marcelo, if you don't mind, I'll try to get some of those points in the answer. Practical steps to get into leadership roles. I think this goes back in many ways both in tech and outside of tech, around relationship skills as well. And I think sometimes those skills aren't actually talked about, or in terms of, we talk about building a network, and sometimes building a network culturally or even just personality wise cannot feel as comfortable when it's across gender, across culture, and there's a number of different factors that come into play. But I would say, at least from my purview, at least for the next at least 5 to 10 years, even with technology being an equalizer, it is important that people know who you are and that people know the work that you're doing. And so we've talked about allyship, we've talked about being able to speak up for yourselves, but also having others speak up on the work that you are doing is hugely important. And there's, I never went to a class in university or college that taught that. I actually learned that after people told me that, or watching other people, because in my head, you put your head down, you work hard. That was the environment that I grew up in. But I think that's just foundational hard work and I think Ivana had mentioned it, though, you have to work twice as hard coming from not as privileged of a background, but making sure that people know what you're working on is so, so, so critical. I think the other piece around really remembering, and I know we've talked about white men here a lot, but also just making sure that we don't broad brush them as a whole, because in this conversation, they are the majority, but aspects of diversity can be gained or lost as we age, right? People become parents, people lose a loved one, somebody gets sick, somebody might get a disability. So I think the conversation around disability is making sure that it's inclusive is how we have that conversation. It's when we talk about, I love food. So it's like, if there's a pie, it's not about giving more people the same slice with the same size pie. It's literally about making the pie bigger. And it's like, who wouldn't want their neighbor to do better, or their cousin to do better, or a friend to do better if we are doing more, which I think technology allows for that. So I think in many ways that we talk about D&I is the same way that we talk about any business opportunity and talk about the value that that's bringing in. And that's the huge piece, that it's not just a soft skill. Yeah, soft skills are a part of it, but the soft skills are there to have greater productivity, greater profit, greater engagement, and then hopefully a better society for all.
Thank you, Manisha. And I also want to hear your thoughts, Ivana. And just to say that Ivana told me the same thing that you just said, Manisha, yesterday. So, the white male also needs to be a champion and be involved and part of the conversation, which is very true. So Ivana, what are your thoughts on diversity in leadership and advocating for more diversity in all the countries?
I think we need to advocate diversity with a goal in mind, because in my opinion, and this is just my personal opinion, being the diversity token on a leadership team sucks. Like, it not only does it suck for you as a person who is seen as like, oh yeah, like this is the token non-white, male person on the board, but it's also there's a backlash effect. And I think Michelle Obama actually said it correctly, that when she first got into Princeton, everybody just assumed that she got into Princeton because of affirmative action, and not because that she worked super hard and got really good grades and all of these things. And so she then spent the rest of her life trying to make up for it. And so I think that's a problem. Like, when you decide to go and become that token, it's a personal decision, but you also have to recognize that there will be a backlash effect on anyone else who comes after you. And I think like that is the burden of being a minority, is that you unfortunately or fortunately represent the rest of your race, gender, religion, whatever. So because for other people, they really only have a sample of one. And so you have to be really careful. And so like there are times, I'm not gonna lie, that for example, I got the meeting or I got invited to an event because they needed diversity. I think it's fine to go there, but you have to be very much aware of the fact that you only got in because you're diversity, but how you act at that event, how effective you are at transforming from a token to someone who can actually provide real value is on you. And fortunately, it means that you can't just slack off, right? But I do think that, when you're talking about how do we actually retain diversity in the leadership positions, like you have to think about that.
Thanks. Francesco, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. By the way, I think I second everything that Manisha and Ivana already said. So those things. I also think, for example, how to lift up people for leadership roles. I think something that I think can be very effective is really like going back to the allyship aspect and really like one big barrier I think for leadership is especially people from underrepresented group don't see themselves as leaders in the current world of tech, for example. But lots of them are. They don't know they are, or they have the potential to be. But they can definitely be very good leaders. So working on this aspect, coaching the person to explore and point out, everything you do, the things you're doing. I see the potential for you to be a great leader. Do you want to consider that direction? Offering coaching to help the person go into that direction. I think it's very important. It's very practical as well. It's talking about the aspect of why some people exclude themselves, select themselves out from these opportunities. I think the other aspect, which is both, I think both are very challenging, but also the other aspect is also very important, is I also think we have to challenge the stereotype, the profile of what's a successful leader. I think we were talking about the fact that tech is white male dominated. I think over the years, this has brought up some stereotypes of what does it mean to be a successful leader, being very assertive, confident, very extrovert, bold, tough. I think that's a very reductive way of describing leadership. I think leadership needs lots of other aspects as well. Needs collaboration, needs compassion, empathy, ability to solve conflict, ability to notice when someone is excluded and is not involved or contributing to a certain discussion. So I think helping companies, helping individual people, and also helping companies understand that there isn't a single way of being a leader. Even in leadership roles, there is value in diversity, in diverse ways of being leaders. Because I think otherwise we just try to have one type of leader, and that's it. That's the only possible type of leader. So inclusive leaders, vulnerable leaders as well. So vulnerability as a leader, I think, is also something important to mention and to coach companies and in understanding that vulnerability, a leader that shows they're vulnerable helps other people raise themselves, because they also feel the bar is not as high as they thought. It's not an impossible dream. We are vulnerable. It's not about it's about really admitting that even when you're a leader, there are situations that are tough. There are lots of days that you're still like dealing with situations that you've never dealt before, and you have to figure it out. You have to learn, and you're not super ready from the beginning. So I think this aspect can also help a lot, having a more diverse leadership population.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I want to give you, Pooja, the last word on these questions before we go to the questions from the audience. What are your thoughts on more diversity in leadership, or even advocating for more conversation on these topics in other parts of the world?
I'll come to this question. I wanted to touch upon something that Manisha and Ivana mentioned when we were talking about recruitment, about how underrepresented groups may not be packaging themselves as well as the majority might be, and how that might be sometimes a disadvantage. I run a few self-promotion workshops where there's a statistic that I shared, which I think is relevant to this conversation. Research shows that about 60, or when there's an open position, often men will apply to it when they have 60% of the skills listed, and women in underrepresented groups will apply when they practically have 100% of the skills listed. And your question about how to have more diversity in leadership positions, I give a two-part answer. One, to the folks who could be potential leaders, just remember this statistic, right? If you most of the time, these folks, you don't feel you're ready for it. You feel like there are a few more check boxes that you have to go check before you apply for that position. And something that I do is think about what would, I think of the smartest, most confident person who I perceive to be the smart and confident person. What would they do in this position? Would they apply? And do something similar where if you're in the minority, think of what somebody who doesn't look like you and who's successful would do in that position. And if you think they'd apply, then take a leap of faith, apply, right? And to folks on the other end, folks who are grooming leaders and who are the hiring managers, there's something at Bloomberg that we call the golden boy, golden girl rule, where managers sometimes tend to go to their, go to this one person who's delivered results in the past. And so every time there's a challenging project, a time critical, task to be done, they go to that person because it's time sensitive. They don't want to take risks. And this person has delivered results in the past. And what you want to do as a manager is take a pause in those situations and see who hasn't been given that opportunity. Because if you don't give the opportunity, you don't even know if these, if some of these folks can rise, learn, and deliver. And so you want to catch yourself in those moments, because that's how you also don't rely on this one golden boy, golden girl to always deliver, because they get the opportunities and they actually keep getting better and so on. And so as managers, it'll be good to keep an eye out on who has not been given the opportunity, but I perceive will not succeed, versus who has been given the opportunity and has not succeeded, in which case you find the appropriate training, pair them with mentors, etc., and give them the support system they need to be able to step up and help in times of critical projects, advancements, etc.
Thank you for sharing that, Pooja. I think it's fascinating to think when you were mentioning about the job description and when people would apply, that we might be making these mistakes and writing a job description that, it's just discouraging, more people from diverse backgrounds to apply. Thank you for mentioning that. So we do have a few questions. A lot of you are quiet today. But we do have some questions here, and I'm going to start with a question from Ihab, because he's asking something that I know probably is in the mind of a lot of people in the Middle East or people we work with, which is, how can I convince an employer who doesn't believe in diversity that including me and his team will bring benefit to his company, which is very true in so many cases. So I'll leave it to you. If you want to answer the question, please unmute yourself, or one of our panelists, of course, and I'll hand it back to you.
Can you just take a first stab at it? So I would actually use it as an opportunity, if appropriate, as a sales pitch. There's a lot of research out there. I'm happy to share some as well. McKinsey has done the research, Deloitte has done the research, Catalyst has done the research. Marcelo referenced some in the beginning of the conversation as well, that spoke to actual profitability with having a more diverse team. So I think in many cases, if it's a business and they're looking to gain more profitability or more customers from different backgrounds, that's one way to go. A lot of times the moral argument doesn't work with people. And I would say that that's probably more normal than not, where people are like, oh yes, I love diversity, because like to the point earlier, diversity can be uncomfortable, it can cause friction. So why would a business that has been doing well enough want to shift on the off chance of bringing in this new way of thinking? And so the way that I've sold it, depending on the individuals or the organization, is the business case where it makes sense, and talking very much about causation and correlation and talking about expansion. There's many companies that have made big mistakes with not having diversity and had to either they've paid fines or it's been reputational damage. So that's one way. Or the other way is the moral case, which doesn't always work, but it has to be if there's a relationship that's been built.
I'll echo what Manisha said. Tying the plenty of research that exists to what this particular company cares about, right? This particular employer has some business goals, and tying, what you said that, in this case, it can bring benefit to the company. Translating the skills that you bring to something that the company can benefit, right? End of the day, it's about business and providing value, and so being able to speak in that language is probably what's going to help convince the employer. In the past, when this is many moons ago, when I wanted to start a diversity group before my time at Bloomberg, I put together a deck, and I knew there's a part of me that felt like it's the right thing to do. Why do I have to make a case? But there was another part of me that said that, of course, I have to, make the case for the company to, invest with the right resources, budget, and people. And I did both in the slide deck, where one was talking about this is how it helps the business, and this is what our competition is doing. And by not investing in diversity, we are actually losing, losing business opportunity. And then at the end, I tried to appeal to their sense of fairness, right? Most people want to do good, and it's always about prioritization and making time. And you also want to avoid discomfort. And so the conversation has to be about how this is not going to be a chore. It's going to be more, it's going to be an asset for them. And so again, you'll go back to how you can translate that into something that the employer is going to care about.
Now I have all the questions here also, that some questions are coming through the chat and questions are coming through some of the documents. And one question is, and curious to hear what all of you have to say, do you think the tech industry is more or less discriminatory than other industries? We tend to think that it's more, there's meritocracy and because of the skills that you need to have. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think the technology is more or less?
I'm happy to go. I'm just mindful I don't want to always be the first one jumping in, but I think it's supposed to be less discriminatory than other industries. That's been the whole backbone of tech, right? That you can do it from anybody can have access. The barriers to entry are low. My concern is I see so many people opting out of technical roles that it makes me think, what is happening? Like, why is the tech industry not as inclusive? What goes on where people leave the industry? And that might not be any different from any other industries, but that's the challenge that I see, is that people will come in from university, from different programs, technical programs, but then they get to a certain point after a few years and they're like, no, I'm good. So that's my biggest concern.
Yeah, I totally agree with Manisha. I think a lot of people, I've seen a lot of even just my friends enter the field as a tech developer, where even if they're not technical, they want to work in technology companies. And then a lot of them usually leave after 2 to 3 years. I think a part of it is also just the incentives are set up at tech companies. A lot of tech companies such as Amazon, like they're not incentivized to keep employees around for more than 5 years. And that's just the way it works. But at the same time, I've also seen a lot of women come into tech and then realizing that because they have a child at home, they can't go to happy hours. And a lot of, for some reason, like a lot of tech people bond over drinks or playing video games or, things like that, a lot of women just, they just can't do because they have a family or some other reason. But I would actually say, I work a lot in national security, and in most national security events that I go to, and even in politics and policy, like I'm typically the only woman there, and probably the youngest one by 20 years, right? The perk of that is that I never have to wait to use the bathroom. Whereas like the line for the men's room is like foreverly long. But I do think like there are definitely industries out there that are less diverse than tech, but I don't at the same time, I don't understand why we're comparing, by using that criteria.
I think I might.
Sorry, Pooja.
I think I might be biased. I've only been in the tech industry, so I can't really compare. Based on personal experiences, I can't compare. But based on what I've observed, and I'm an optimist by nature. I feel like tech industry is more inclusive and more transparent, especially the big companies. And so I'm very hopeful about the future. And I've seen people entering tech industry at various stages of their career. Folks who have never done tech in their career, breaking through and entering in junior roles. Sometimes folks are retired from the Navy, and I've worked with some of those folks, and people have incredible stories. And so I feel like tech is an industry where different people can break into, and it disheartens me that there are people who get out of tech early in their careers. That's also a reality, but I'm very optimistic that the change that we see in diversity is accelerating because of tech, and will continue to do that because of tech.
Yeah, I think Pooja, you and I are lining up on this, because I also wanted to say something more positive about tech. I think tech, we recognize there is a problem that we're trying to solve. Progress is not as fast as we'd like. Obviously, like we're all very passionate about this, so we cannot be happy with the progress. We would want to see more progress. But I also agree with Pooja in the sense that I think tech has huge potential to be very, very inclusive, to be very, very well represented, because of the nature of the job itself, because of the fact that there is so much need for diverse views, diverse perspectives, and there is and merit is a thing, is like the once people are able to contribute their ideas is what matters. The quality of the idea is what matters, not who brings the idea. So there's even companies who embrace, for example, using tools to make decisions, using collaborative tools that make it easier for a large number of people to voice ideas, to say what they really think. So I also see a lot of positive change happening, and I think the potential for tech is really huge. That being said, that I don't think we're happy with where we are. We want to improve.
Still a lot of work to do. I still have a couple of questions for you, but before I do it, I just want to remind our participants that we're going to be posting a short feedback survey in the chat very soon. So once we're done with the session, please do not just go away. Just click on that link so that you can fill out the survey. It's really important for us to improve our future speaker sessions. So it only takes a couple of minutes. So please, we really appreciate your feedback. Now I have one question here from Qasim. And I will pair up this question with another question that was sent to me. So he's saying very similarly to Ehab, how can we convince others that the idea of diversity is so important? He believes and support this idea, but others look at it only as if it were a disadvantage. And I want to add to that question: how can individuals bring their uniqueness and their background into interviewing? We talked about interviewing a little bit. What should they be highlighting, and what should they not highlight during a job interview? So curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I can jump in with that. I think for me, like just saying like, hey, I am, not white, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that actually flies even with someone like me. And I obviously clearly really, really support diversity and inclusion, because that doesn't tell me anything about how you're different, and rather I want to hear about the experiences, the unique experiences that you've had. So even talking about a unique experience where you were denied X, Y, and Z because of your skin color or something like that, but then how you actually overcame that, right? Like, I would love to hear more, like, I'd love to hear more of everything being packaged as experiences and how you dealt with it, rather than simply saying, I am X, Y, and Z, and so I should get this role.
I think similarly on the point of perspectives is tying it back to something unique to you. So don't ever, and I'm not saying that anybody does, but try to make it be an example that they might have heard from someone else, is make sure that it's unique to you. And practice, practice, practice. I think many times what diversity means goes back to identity and life experiences. And as individuals, we don't always think about that. So if I was to ask you, tell me about yourself, what will be the first 3 things that you would say? And that's such a simple question. And almost every interview begins with that because they want to break the ice. And it's very easy to just read off your CV and be like, oh, this is, these are the 3 things I've done. But the question is, tell me about yourself. And I think that's a great opportunity to show a little bit about yourself that the interviewer will remember about you outside of your CV.
Absolutely. And I have a final question for the panel, and it's very related to what you've been mentioning, Manisha and Ivana. So what if someone asks in an interview about my religion or marital status, and I don't know what to tell them? I think they will discriminate against me. What should I say? And I think that goes for any other question that is about your nationality or your background. So how can we answer that question?
So depending on the company and the country, it's actually illegal to ask that question, right? So I would actually feel comfortable to I would try to build up confidence to say, I'm not comfortable answering those questions, and see and be like, but happy to answer any other questions. Because and then if there is a way to let the company know that the question was asked, because those questions aren't allowed to be asked. Now, I also know in some cultures and certain countries, those are completely normal questions to be asked. And I think it's figuring out what I would ask them. Oh, can you help me understand how that is relevant to this position? Sometimes what they're trying to get to is, will you be, do you have hours? Will your family structure allow you to work or not work? And they want to deal with that in the beginning versus the end. But I hate those questions because that's not relevant necessarily to me. So I think if you're comfortable enough to go back and say, if you can explain to me, what's the next question? So then I can answer that question. Sometimes with the religion question, they're looking to see if you are looking for any accommodations for prayer times or specific times of year, or things like that. And again, it's how you answer that and how you're comfortable answering that. But at the flip side is that also a place where you would want to work if there are other options?
Like Manisha, I also hate that that's a question that's asked in interviews. I work in New York City, and it's illegal to ask questions, personal questions like that. And so if somebody were to ask me, I would do exactly what Manisha said, that I'm not comfortable answering this question. How is this relevant to this role? However, I have to acknowledge that that's a real question, and saying that in some places is basically getting a rejection, right? You're not going to be, you're likely not to get the role. And so in those situations, I might actually answer the question with, yes, I am married and I have a child, but can you help me understand how that is relevant and how that might impact this role? Is there, do you think that this will need travel? In which case, I'm very happy to accommodate that. Like, help me understand how that might, change the decision making. So you're answering, but you're also trying to, help elicit from the interviewer what assumptions they're going to make based on this response that might inform the hiring decision.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll actually deflect the question too. So instead of just answering the question, especially when you're meeting them face to face, right? You can see on their desk sometimes like the pictures of their children. And a lot of times I'd be like, oh, I actually meant to ask you, since this is a conversation, I see pictures of 2 of your kids. How old are they? And people love talking about their families, and they will just keep on going. So.
I love what Ivana said, because often in interviews, there's a time for questions, and it's a great opportunity to use that time to, get some of these responses. What are you looking for? What's the, what's the best candidate for this job? Get the interviewer talking about what exactly they're looking for, and then see if you can tie your skills, to whatever is top of their mind for this particular role.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
the interview.
Yeah, go ahead.
No,
You have the final word, Francesco. Go for it.
Sorry, I think the summary of what both Manisha, Ivana, and Pooja were saying is like the interview is also a way for the candidate to find out about the company, to learn about the company. It's a two-way street. The candidate is also interviewing in a way that the company to understand whether the company is a good fit, if the company is an inclusive company or not, if they value diversity or not. So I think maybe being asked this question can be the opportunity to ask back more about the company itself.
Well, I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. The 4 panelists, we're very much appreciative of you sharing your stories in this difficult but very important topic. I'm sure I'm learning a lot from some of the policies and practices that we can implement in our own organization. As a reminder, this is the 3rd of our 4 sessions on the digital trends shaping opportunities for youth in the Middle East, and what we need to understand to help bridge the digital inequality gap. You can go to recoded.com, that is RE-CODED.com, or directly to our website, recoded.com/Bloomberg-sessions to learn more about this last session and other activities within the scope of this partnership. Please also follow us on social media. We are at Recoded Official, or subscribe to our newsletter to receive updates on this and other events. A reminder again to fill out our short survey before you go so that we can improve our future sessions. This has been really a pleasure to be your host and moderator today. Again, thank you very much, the speakers and Bloomberg and the incredible team at Recoded for making this happen. I hope you have an incredible end of the day and end of the week, and see you in our 4th session next time. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.